Welcome to Crime Most French, a weekly podcast taking you through intriguing cases carried out on French soil. Researched and narrated by Cedric and rudely interrupted by me, Melanie. We're the true crime podcast All the Lions. Crack open le vin and let the mayhem commence.
The case this week is that of the French Anneka Rice. It's the case of Philippe de Dieuleveult, who was the runner in the original version of the treasure hunt. In 1985, he embarked on an expedition to go down the Zaire River on the raft and was never seen again.
I'll give a bit of a background for Treasure Hunt. There was a TV program that initially started in France and was on in the very early 80s. Way back when Channel 4 first started, they obviously didn't have a lot of their original content, so you had programs like Countdown, which is another French program, which is still going today. But for those outside the UK and France, Treasure Hunt was a game that was studio-based, that was around solving a cryptic riddle that would be specific to where the other portion of the game took part, which was you would have a runner in a helicopter and you would solve this riddle to where this person and the helicopter were based. So it was very dynamic. This is pre-internet days, obviously, so it was back at base in the studio. You would have people just sitting with banks of encyclopedias trying to solve these clues and riddles, and then they would tell the person in the helicopter where to go for the next clue. So that's a brief rundown of Treasure Hunt for those uninitiated.
Yeah, and I remember watching them on Sunday morning when I was a kid, because it ran in France from 1980 to 1984, and I think in the UK from 82 to 80, can't remember actually, 90 maybe even.
Oh, I don't know. It did run for a long time,
Yeah.
and there was more than one. Anneka Rice did it for a long time, and someone else did it. Annabelle Giles, she was an ex-tennis person, and then apparently Susie Perry did it, the MotoGP. So I mean, it was definitely dynamic. It's a dynamic role, in terms of an actual quiz game.
Philippe was born on the 4th of July 1951 in Versailles into an old Brittany family. You can tell from the name they used to be aristocratic or aristocratic adjacent. He has 4 brothers. Very early on, his mom decided that order would be maintained in a household full of boys, and she would always carry in her belt another belt, a leather belt, that she used to discipline the kids.
Wow.
Philip, being particularly tumultuous, tasted the belt fairly often, and sometimes blood was drawn.
Wow, that's really hardcore.
That is really hardcore. He did his military service as a parachutist hunter, so that's essentially parachutists that are trained for like special operations like the SAS or I guess the Marines in the US.
Mm-hmm.
In 1977, he gets married to Diane de Torca, and you can tell from the name that her daddy gave her ponies when she was a kid.
Yeah, also sounds like they came from Brittany as well.
She did. She was a direct descendant of Robert Surcouf, who was one of the most famous corsairs or privateers at the time. He quickly started working on TV sets, and in 1978, he finished his third of an adventure game that was shown on TV called Race Around the World. In that game, contestants had to go around the world in 4 months, and they had to film their adventures, I guess, with a Super 8 camera.
So this was Michael Palin, pre-Michael Palin.
Yeah, it's kind of a more hardcore Michael Palin. I don't remember that game at all. I don't remember what the parameters were, but I suspect they made it a bit harder than just going around the world as you could. They probably had schedules to keep and things that they couldn't do or whatever. I really don't remember.
Yeah, I mean, 4 months isn't a long time. Not much time for sightseeing and postcard sending.
No. And I wonder if also at finances they might have had no money to do it or whatever, and they had to find ways of doing it cheap or free. I really can't remember.
Okay.
I've seen a clip of him receiving his prize, And you can tell from his face that he was super happy, he had found what he wanted to do. And you could also say, from looking at him, that he was a cookie we shade as well.
Oh, right, because he's shade arrogant, was he?
Yeah, it totally was.
Okay.
In 1979, he's hired to work as a journalist on a TV show.
Mm-hmm.
His first assignment is to go into Chad, but Chad at the time was a war zone. There was civil war after civil war, coup after coup.
I don't think Chad is that much more stable now, is it?
It's slightly more stable, in part because there's a big military force in the country from France, which keeps it fairly stable. So nobody really tries to take power because there's way too many soldiers around that they don't control.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been bad for like 20 years.
There are quite a lot of African countries where France certainly made their presence known in terms of colonialism.
Yes. So anyway, Chad is not a place where you want it to be.
No.
Unless you were a nut job. In 1980, just after the Islamic Revolution in Iran, he sneaked into Iran undercover and illegally with the then director of MSF to have a look around and explore what was going on in Iran.
MSF is Doctors Without Borders, basically.
According to official papers, he was a volunteer for MSF.
So, I mean, it was all under the guise of, well, he was going in for charity reasons, for charitable reasons.
Well, yes and no. He was an official volunteer for MSF, but going into Iran or Chad or wherever was not official. They went there unofficially to see what was going on.
Yeah, but it would be general that Médecins Sans Frontières would be there anyway.
Yeah, I don't think they go where they're not welcome, though.
No.
They normally go when they're asked to come or allowed to come. But in that case, they weren't allowed. Nobody was. Okay.
But they just hoped that the big Red Cross would kind of keep them safe.
Oh, no. Nobody knew they were there.
No,
they were in hiding.
So it was covert?
It was completely covert. It was illegal. They shouldn't have been there. If they had been caught, they would have been in deep trouble.
Okay.
So, no, they weren't protected by the Red Cross. They were there to see what was going on because nobody could. That's all it was. And he did the same for MSF in Kurdistan, in Cambodia, Nicaragua, Libya, and other places, all war zones in the year that followed.
He was very gung-ho, obviously.
He was, yes. And I've seen pictures of him being chased by paramilitaries and machine guns and like 50 cars mounted at the back of Toyotas and this kind of stuff. Leaving countries on helicopters, taking off at the last second. It wasn't staged. It was all true.
Okay.
And that's what he was doing at the time. In 1981, he's hired to be the runner on the Chasse au Trésor, which is the treasure hunt show. He is remembered by most people who worked on the show as being nice, as being humorous, and also for the risks he took during the show every week. And there's, for example, I saw an interview with Jacques-Antoine, the guy who created the game, and he said that he remembers particularly once he was trying to get onto Fort Boyard to get a clue there during the show, and it was in the middle of a storm and he nearly drowned, and he was stranded for over 3 hours trying not to drown until the helicopter could come because the weather was better at that time.
Yeah. The weather, Fort Boyard is a big offshore fort which is quite close to us.
Yes.
So you're talking about Atlantic weather, and if you catch the Atlantic in the winter, it's just storm after storm after storm that comes blowing in. So, yeah, Fort Boyard, I would imagine, could be quite hairy to get to.
Yeah, especially at the time when it wasn't equipped. Because now it is equipped now it has a helipad, for example, which is being renovated right now. It has a helipad, it has a landing, like pontoon or whatever for boats. At the time, it had none of that. It was just a fort that had been abandoned for 200 years.
Yeah.
So getting on it was very difficult. There was nothing to allow you to get in. You had to find a way in.
Yeah.
And that didn't go right.
It's a very impressive place. Very, very kind of like foreboding. You should check it out on the internet, peeps.
Although that didn't go well. He survived. He made it. But that also gave Jacques-Antoine an idea for a new show, which was Fort Boyard in the future.
Okay, yeah. So he helped create another show.
He did, by nearly drowning.
I guess when you've been in war-torn places, you tend to become kind of like risk-averse in your day-to-day life.
Yeah, it was probably also his personality. That's just who he was.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
He probably didn't see it as that much of a risk what he was doing.
Well, maybe he did, but he just liked it.
Mm.
Because when you see him receive his prize for going around the world, you can tell that it's just the best thing ever he had just finished.
He's just an adrenaline junkie.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So he stays on the show, The Treasure Hunt, until 1984, and at that time he's grown tired of it.
Mm.
And according to friends, he's fed up of the staging of events in the show. He's tired of knowing where the solution is from the start. He actually wanted to play the game, and because he was on TV all the time, he was given more information than he would have wanted to know.
What do you mean TV wasn't telling the entire truth?
It came as a shock to me, because I was watching it and I wasn't aware that he knew where the clue was, or that some events that happened during the show were completely staged, or I never knew that. I learned it when I was researching this case.
Okay.
So, but yeah, he got tired of that. He just wanted to do the actual adrenaline thing, and on the show he did crazy things. He didn't just nearly drown. He jumped from planes and jumped from helicopters at low altitude, which you shouldn't do.
No.
And he just did crazy things.
Wow. There's so much turbulence when a helicopter comes down.
Yeah, and also you don't have much time to open your parachute, so you can't really open it too close to the helicopter, so you have to wait even more until you're very close to the ground. It did crazy stuff. So clearly that's what he was interested in, and knowing where to go and knowing that this is going to happen was not his thing. He was tired. He wanted to go anyway.
He didn't understand that they had time constraints, and they
had to make it interesting. So they had to guarantee that it was interesting to watch. They couldn't risk a show where everything's boring and everything is straightforward and there's no problem. So they were probably staging things that he knew were going to happen, but would make the show interesting to watch. So the show ended in 1984, and his friend said that he was happy with that because he was tired of it. It was time to finish. And nobody could follow him. There's no way. It's not like the UK where they were doing reasonable things and you could replace the runner by another runner.
Yeah.
Nobody would have done what he was doing.
No.
So it was impossible to continue the show without him. In 1984, he publishes an autobiography called I Have Blue Sky in My Passport, which became an instant bestseller. He sold 300,000 copies.
Okay.
Because he was very famous at the time. Still is. To a certain part of the population, obviously. You have to be a certain age to remember him.
Yeah.
It wasn't publicly known at the time, and during the time he was alive, but Philippe was a member of the DGSE, the DGSE, the French secret services, the equivalent of the CIA or the MI6, so external services, not internal services.
So we're talking James Bond.
We're talking James Bond. It became known after he died because his mum asked a friend of the family to go through his military papers, and he found very, very strange papers that were telling him to go places and be in a certain, for example, train station at a certain time of the day on a certain date, wearing certain shoes and a certain newspaper in his right hand, and somebody would contact him.
Wow.
This kind of stuff.
Yeah, just that just sounds so cliched.
It does, but that was official military papers. It was marching orders.
Yeah.
So until then, nobody had known that he was involved with the army at all.
Okay. So when someone approaches you commenting on the Canadian geese flying east early this winter or something, then...
Yeah. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The only people who knew or were aware of some of it were his wife, I guess because you had to justify disappearing once in a while, and one of his brothers who was a high-ranking officer in the army, so he decided to tell him.
Okay.
But nobody knows really what they knew and how much details they had been told. They knew he was involved somehow with the army. Did they know it was the DGSE? Did they know it was secret services?
They don't know.
Don't know.
But because he was in, his brother was in the armed forces, it kind of like gives the story a bit more legitimacy, I guess.
Yeah, oh no, it's not debated. It's true. It is. It has been confirmed. It was made public in 1994 by his brother.
Okay.
Before that, for nearly 10 years,
no one knew.
It was known by a couple of people, but that was it. But it's not really clear what exactly he was doing. In 2006, his son, called Duc Dual, anyway, made a documentary about his dad.
Okay. Because
he didn't remember his dad. He died when he was 5, so he just doesn't remember him at all. So he wanted to know what happened to him, and he started interviewing people, and he did interview the person who was the director of the DGSE at the time of his dad's disappearance. I forgot the name of that guy, but he was very well known. I remember his name from when I was a kid. General something, I can't remember. And he does confirm that, yes, he was a member of the DGSE, but he was a reservist captain in the DGSE.
Oh, so he's minimizing his role.
Yeah, so what he said was that he took part in training, but as a reservist, he would never take part in an actual operation.
Okay.
And I find it that very hard to believe that not Job Philippe, who risks his life for a TV show, would be happy to just go to some training once in a while, and that was it.
No.
I can't see that happening. It's not possible. He would just go away and do something else. There's no way he would just do some training, even though it was some probably serious training, but still it was just training that would never result in an operation. It
would seem very strange that he was going to all of these very sensitive places not to use him for information gathering.
Yeah, he had already shown years before that in the early 80s that he could get into weird countries where you're not allowed to be and report on what was going on inside.
Yeah.
And somehow they only train him, and it's a certainty as a reservist he would never take part in an operation. No. That doesn't sound likely.
No, not very.
But of course, because that's the official line, and because it's the military, nobody has access to the actual files, so we will never know, or if we know, it's in 100 years when the files are made public.
Of course.
So who knows what the reality was. But I find it very hard to believe that he was just a reservist. There's no way he was.
Yeah, it sounds a bit unlikely.
We know of a few missions he was sent on, which were allegedly training missions, because we don't have the details. All we have is the marching orders that he kept in his papers.
Okay.
But for example, he was trained as a commando in 1978.
Right.
He was trained for rural guerrilla in the Pyrenees in 1979.
Okay.
And for that, he received the congratulations of his hierarchy. And you think, why would somebody get congratulated to go for training?
Yeah, no, it's very
Surely there was something more than just training.
Yeah. It definitely sounds like they're trying to minimize his role.
Yeah, it does sound like it. It's not credible. But anyway, that's the official story. Now let's have a look at what really happened. He disappeared in 1985. So in 1985, he decides to take part in an expedition to go down the Zaire River in now DR Congo.
The whole thought of going to that bit of Africa, there's so many alarm bells ringing, I have tinnitus.
Yeah, but at the same time, when you're used to go into Cambodia during the
Khmer Rouge,
or in Iran days after the Islamic Revolution, when they were killing people left, right, and center. It's just a river. It's nothing special, really.
But the guy certainly was no great father. He's obviously the fun uncle who obviously just goes around the world looking for fun and does not give a crap.
He had kids, and his wife was saying that their kids were catching colds because he was coming in and going so fast.
Yeah, that's just not good. What a terrible dad. He might have got information for the country, but boo, shame on him.
No, he wasn't a good dad, clearly. So the expedition was called Africa Raft. So the plan was to go down the Zaire River on 2 inflatable rafts. But we're not talking dinghies or tiny rafts. They were massive rafts that were like 10 meters long. They were...
So they're kind of like the Zeppelins. The Zodiacs that you get on...
Yes, but supersized.
Yeah.
They were designed by a guy who crossed the Atlantic in a rowboat twice.
He sounds like he's a nut job as well.
Yes, exactly. And he was interviewed by The Sun, and he said these rafts would never sink. You could put a car on it, and it would go down the river, no problem.
Yeah. So go down a river which has no current on it, presumably, and not sink.
Well, even currents, they would never sink because they were too big. The two sides of the raft, the balloony bits, were 8.5 meters long and 80 centimeters wide.
Wow.
So the size of a table, a dining room table, but much, much longer than a dining room table. And there were 2 of those on each raft. So unless there was a hole in that, and it was probably super thick rubber, reinforced rubber, there's no way it would sink. So when he was interviewed, he was saying there's no way anything could have happened if they had stayed on the boat. The Zaire River is the second largest river in terms of flow, just behind the Amazon, and it flows 50,000 cubic meters a second.
That sounds quite a lot.
We're talking a lot of water going down the river. The expedition started at Lake Tanganyika, which is in Burundi, I think, or at the Burundi border. They go down the river in late July, early August 1985. And at first, it's very, very boring. Nothing happens. It's just a super wide river. In places, it's 20 kilometers wide.
Wow.
So it's massive. And because it's so large, it's very slow. But around the 5th or 6th of August, they get to a section where the river is as narrow as 400 meters. So we're talking several kilometers to a few meters. So the water goes super fast.
Yeah. There must have been a lot of like whirlpools and...
Yeah, it was full of rapids and whirlpools, So on the 6th of August 1985, their radios go silent. And until then, they were in constant communication with people monitoring the expedition in Paris. They disappear completely near a dam, a hydroelectric dam, near a town called Inga.
Okay.
And one of the team members, called Thierry Sadoun, is the only survivor that was on the rafts because he was sick on that day.
So he survived because he wasn't there?
He stopped, yes. Okay. He wasn't there, and therefore he survived. He was sick for a little while, as far as I remember. He was really managing logistics for a while.
Okay.
Because he was following them, essentially, but not taking part in all the dangerous stuff.
Okay.
So he's the one survivor that was supposed to be on the raft until two more survived at the very, very last minute on the day they disappeared. It's François Laurenceau and Jean-Louis Amblard, who were really the two least specialists of the expedition. They weren't sports people. They weren't crazy nut jobs. Okay. One of them was a CEO of a company, and the other one, I can't remember what he did. But they were just normal people who knew either members of the expedition or people organizing the expedition.
Yeah, it seems strange that you would do,
they had room for two people when they were ready to go, and they were asked, okay, well, we have room, do you want to come? And they said, yeah, okay, we'll come.
I think my answer would have been no.
Yeah. And on the day everybody disappeared, they were left on an island called the Island of the Hippos. And
is that just in the middle of the river?
It's in the middle of the river, and they decided they were sleeping there overnight before they started attacking the rapid section. And they saw what it looked like, and they said, no, we're not going down there. We're stopping now, and that's it. We withdraw from the expedition. So they were left on the island when the others went down the river.
I'm going on the assumption that the hippos had moved out, because an island with hippos in it sounds just as dangerous as the rapids.
On the way down, they killed hippos and ate hippos and various animals on the way down to eat better food than what they had, because they had obviously all survival stuff like survival rations and
army
dry
rations,
food, and it wasn't great. So they hunted on the way down. And in one case, they killed a hippo and shared it with the nearest village.
Oh, poor bed.
So I don't know if there were hippos on that island on that day, but it was called the Island of Hippos, and I suppose there were hippos at some point.
Poor hippos.
So they disappear. There's one guy who survives because he was ill, and two guys who were too scared to get on the rafts, and that saved their lives.
Can I just interject? When you say scared, you mean sensible and didn't go?
Yes. Yes, because when they saw the rapids, they were known as being impassable. Nobody had ever done it because it was so crazy. And that prompted the creation of a railway in between 1890 and 1898 to go around that section of the river, because it was strictly impossible to go through. So boats at the time, at late 19th century, would stop on the side of the river, unload, load the train would go around that section of the river, and they would reload boats afterwards.
Okay, so there'd be a terminus and a train. If nothing else is telling you that this is not a good idea, it's the fact that logistically there's something else being set up to bypass it.
Yeah.
That should really tell you not to do or go there.
Yeah, but they were all nut jobs, so they don't want to do it because they could.
Je ne comprends pas.
So 7 hours after the radios went silent, the two members that withdrawn, Laurent and Amblard, arrived near the dam. They were rescued from their island by fishermen, and the fishermen were fishing on lorry tires. So they would inflate the tires and go on the river and fish that way on floating thingies.
Okay.
They knew the river, so they knew how to not get caught by the currents and the whirlpools and all that. So that's how they survived.
Okay.
And one fisherman saw these two people on the island and came and said, "Do you need help?" And they said, yeah. So he took them to the shore, but it took 4 hours. So it's not a small trip.
No.
They were off the island and they went down the river on foot to try to catch up with the others because they knew they would stop at some point. So they get to near the dam.
I'm taking it's not some kind of like gentle meandering towpath.
Oh no, I have no details about that, but it's jungle most likely.
Exactly.
Yeah. When they get there, they are met by a gendarmerie force that was on high alert.
Okay.
The area where the dam was very close to a forbidden zone where mercenaries from neighboring countries, mainly Burundi, Libya, and Angola, were trying to start a revolt.
Oh,
so that whole zone was totally forbidden. So one side of the river was allowed, one side was forbidden.
Okay, so which side were they on?
They were allowed on the side they were.
Okay, phew.
Allegedly, anyway.
Oh, okay.
The two guys learned that the message coming from Kinshasa, capital of Congo, announcing the arrival of the two rafts, it had been sent, but when it was received by the local commander, it wasn't forwarded to the local forces around the dam. So they had no clue that people were coming down the river.
So out of context, just two random rafts are going to appear.
Yeah, the message was supposed to make sure that they're not mistaken for being commandos going down the river to blow up the dam.
These aren't mercenaries. They're not here to destroy the dam.
Yes. Yeah. And because the mercenaries were in part white, they were, for example, Russian and Cuban forces advising the local rebellion. It wasn't entirely impossible that a bunch of white people on two rafts would go down the river to blow up the dam. So it was totally believable that it was mercenaries coming down. Nobody knows what happened to the first raft on which Philip was. Was it an accident? Was it drowning? Was it an assassination? Nobody really knows what happened. The second raft was found up the river, and it was completely shredded, and only the metal structure of the raft was left. There was no rubber left. There was nothing left. It was totally gone. But the first raft was found later on, undamaged.
Right.
So the first explanation for what happened is an accident. Some dam employees at the time report having watched a raft go down the rapids. There was in particular an American advisor with air bunnies, make what you want of that, called Ken Selman, who reports having seen the raft drift on the river toward the sharp end, because there's a very sharp bend just round the dam, essentially.
Okay.
The dam cut a kind of shortcut between two parts of the river when there was a sharp bend to flow some of the water through the dam.
Okay.
He said that he saw the raft being swallowed by the currents west of the dam. He describes that he saw the raft, which is the first one, the one on which Philip was, disappear for about 5 seconds, then jump out of the water, turn on itself upside down, then go down into the water, disappear again, and reappear a bit later. And I've seen pictures of the river. That would not have been on a very short distance. That would have been on hundreds of meters because of the speed of the currents.
So total roller coaster.
Total roller coaster down the river at high speed on huge distances.
And I'm guessing they weren't tethered to the boat.
No, they weren't attached to the boat, and also it was full of rocks. So when you are underwater for 5 seconds, you probably are underwater for 300 or 400 meters, and essentially your head is scratching the rocks under the water.
Oh my God.
So yes, he said that he didn't see anybody on board, and he can't see how anybody who wouldn't be attached to the rafts would have survived stayed on the rafts.
Yeah, God. Okay.
Especially during the loop.
Yeah.
However, that story doesn't completely hold water.
Not like the boat.
Pun intended, yeah. as the raft was found again, it had no sign of damage at all. The radio antenna was working fine.
Okay.
So nobody knows why they wouldn't have contacted anybody. Was intact, and in fact, that's what was holding the raft. So it was essentially anchored on shore.
Yeah. Seems unlikely if it done all those big, huge maneuvers that an antenna would have survived.
Yeah. Also, nearby under a rock, they found pots of coffee, oil, and pretty much all the equipment that was on the rafts at the time. So they didn't lose their equipment.
Yeah, that doesn't sound very
And somehow
plausible.
they were hidden under a rock.
Yeah, no, that sounds fanciful.
Yes. There's another witness called Ntunasi Atanga, who was a local engineer working at the dam, and one of his friends. They say that on the 12th of August, we're talking 6 days later, at about 11 a.m., from a cliff nearby, they were stationed at a small airfield, which was high on the cliff above the river. He saw 3 white men moving things around and on the rafts, which were intact still at the time.
Okay, so this is by the side of the river.
That's by the side of the river where the rafts was parked, essentially.
So that one surviving raft that Philippe was on. Okay.
He says that they were moving yellow bags, and the expedition bags were yellow, bright yellow. He said that he tried to signal them using a fire and a white shirt, but they weren't paying attention.
Okay, that sounds like something out of a Hollywood movie.
Yes, but because they didn't seem to be in any danger, he didn't see any point trying to reach them and talk to them, so he just watched them. And by 4 p.m. or so, the 3 men disappeared, and he has no idea where they went. However, a week later, Atanga was interviewed again, and he wasn't so sure anymore what the color of the people he saw, if they were white or black. He said that at that distance, which was about 1.5 kilometers, he couldn't tell. So maybe they were black. Maybe they were just locals. But his friend that was there with him, and also a witness, said no, they were definitively white.
I'm just trying to judge that in my head, whether you could actually tell somebody's ethnic background. Could you? I don't know.
It depends on the equipment you have. I've heard, depending on which article you read, either they didn't have any equipment, in which case at 1.5 kilometers,
that seems a bit unlikely.
People are just big dots.
Yes.
In some articles, they had binoculars.
No, so then you'd be able to tell.
So you would think they could tell at least the skin color, but we don't know. He wasn't sure anymore.
But I mean, that just purely highlights how eyewitness testimonies are just so bad. Yeah.
Ken Selman is never found again and never interviewed again.
So he's totally the American.
He's the American
consultant,
totally
expert, and he's never found again. Where he just vanishes. He just vanishes. He goes to ground.
Yeah. There's a documentary made in 1986 that analyzed the preparation of the expedition and looking at all the equipment, the training, and everything, and the actual state of the river, concludes that there was no way they would make it. It was always going to be a disaster. The analysis and Ken Selman's account make the accident explanation the most likely explanation. Okay. And that is the official line, mostly. It is possible that the locals found the raft and anchored it. Yeah. And then unloaded it to sell whatever they found on the raft. But because they couldn't move everything at once, they hid the stuff behind rocks. That's very possible. It's also possible that the 3 men were survivors, if they were white, but then where did they go? Where did they disappear in the forest? It's hard to tell where they go. So the accident explanation is the most likely, but it still has holes in it. Yeah. Another explanation is a mistake and a drowning. So that one is about really the story that Philippe's son, Tugdual, is pushing. For him, that's what happened. So the story is that the Zaire army, who was stationed there, messed up. If, as the 2 survivors mentioned, the message announcing the arrival of the raft never arrived or never was distributed to the ground forces, then it's very easy to think that they thought they might have been mercenaries and they would have tried to stop them before they got to the dam, not knowing that it was in fact an expedition and they were allowed to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess strategically dams are quite vulnerable in times.
Oh, that's a massive dam in Africa. It provides electricity for a large part of Africa. That's a very, very, very large dam.
So if there was mercenaries, it would be a big target.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And that would be a disaster if it was blown up.
Mm.
So you would think that they would have the responsibility and they would have been told in no uncertain terms that they have to defend the dam. So, yeah, okay. So if they didn't know anybody was coming, I can see how they would have shot them.
Yeah, a couple of rafts with a bunch of white dudes on them. Uh-oh.
Yeah. So the son thinks that the second raft, the one that was found in pieces, was destroyed in the rapids and the 4 passengers killed. He's happy with that explanation.
Okay.
And he also thinks that the first raft on which his dad was, which only had 3 people, because remember, one wasn't taking part at that point, was essentially shot and they drowned. It's even more likely to be the case because not only there were mercenaries in the area, but there was also a rebellion led by Laurent Kabila, who became president afterwards and a few years later, who was leading a revolt starting from that area. So we're talking northeast of Zaire. And he was helped by Russian and Cuban advisors, so white people.
Okay.
And his forces were made up of Zaire and Angolan mercenaries. So when you think about that area being always kind of dangerous because Zaire and Burundi are not countries that get along very well.
No.
Plus, there's a rebellion. Plus, there's mercenaries and foreign advisors.
Yeah.
You can imagine that they were very, very trigger happy.
Yeah.
That is also the explanation that the director of the GSE at the time, who was interviewed, pushes. He said he asked some of his men to lead an undercover investigation unofficially. And what they reported to him is essentially that story. So as far as he's concerned, that's what happened. There was something, the Zaire army messed up.
Yeah.
The information didn't flow. They thought they were mercenaries and they shot the survivors.
Okay.
But again, it's hard to know if that really is the story because both the Zaire and French governments didn't try hard to solve that problem. We know that the director of the GSE says that he asked for an undercover investigation, but there was never an official investigation.
Okay.
There was never a good explanation given by Zaire. So at the same time, it's like somebody's covering up something.
It just sounds like, let's not talk about it on the international stage and it might go away, because I mean, that would cause quite a big kerfuffle.
Exactly. Zaire was a fairly big ally of France in Africa at the time. And it could be that diplomatically it made more sense to bury the story to not embarrass the Zaire army.
Yeah.
And it was more important than actually knowing what happened to a dude. So
exactly. Who should have known better?
Yes. So it could be what happened, but again, because it's nothing is official, we can't know. We can't really decide. The last possible explanation is an assassination. So this one is an explanation that is given by an ex-Secret Service officer from Zaire. So he's working for the Zairian Secret Services.
Okay. He's the local James Bond.
He's the local James Bond, yes. He's called Okito Bene Bene. And he published a book in 1994 called I Saw Philippe de Dieuleveult Being Killed, I think it was called.
That's not, it's a bit of a blunt title. It doesn't run off the tongue very well.
Yeah. He says that the Secret Services in Zaire at the time thought that he was somehow linked to the Libyan regime, and they decided to take action.
Okay, so they were obviously under the impression that he wasn't just merely a trainee.
Well, they didn't know he was an actual member of the GSE, but they had reason to think that he was somehow involved. Okito died in 2009, so we can't ask him questions, and that's it. We don't have any more than his book, but his book is very interesting. He describes how on the 6th of August 1985, he was working in Kinshasa at his desk, so he was a member of the Secret Services, and he received a call reporting the presence of a Cuban commando on the river, white dudes on the raft, essentially.
Okay.
Gaddafi, not long before that, had exhorted the Zaire people to revolt against Mobutu. Mobutu is the Mugabe of Zaire, really.
Oh, he sounds like a charmer then.
Oh, he was a total charmer. Okito even spent 27 days in prison because he was suspected of being in league with the Libyans as well.
Okay.
And he was eventually freed, but he was kind of wary of not doing what he's told. So when he receives the call saying there's a bunch of Cubans on the raft going down the river,
you jump to it.
He jumped to it and said, okay, I need to do something. I need to show that I'm not a Libyan sympathizer.
Yes. I'm Team Zaire all the way.
Yeah, exactly. So he decides to go to the area. And at the time, because it's a dictator and everybody tries to look good to the leader, all the services of the army, the secret services, and everybody was competing to look good.
So basically, they had a target on their back and they had more than one team trying to take them out.
Essentially, yes. The secret services and the presidential secret services both decide to go to the area where the Cubans are going down the river. So they race there and they want to be the first.
Yeah. So this is Cubans between air bunnies. When they say Cuban, they do in fact mean French.
When they say Cuban, they mean white dudes. Yeah. Really. But they knew they were Cubans in the area. Okay. That was a fact. They knew that for sure.
Yeah. It just so happens that sadly that Cubans and Europeans are interchangeable.
Look very similar, especially at a distance when you live in Central Africa and you rarely see white people.
Yes.
So yes, you wouldn't make a difference.
No.
So they all race to the area, and it's the presidential secret services that arrive first. So it's not Okito that arrives first.
Right.
But he meets the presidential secret services there.
Right.
On the way, they received another message saying that 5 members of the Africa Raft expedition had been arrested and 2 had been killed. So at that point, it means that the local forces have sorted out who it was that was going down the river.
Okay.
And they fucked up. Because they shot them.
So there was no questions asked. It was just bang, bang, bang then.
Yeah, the local person in charge is Lieutenant Kazongo. And when he's interrogated, he says that he intercepted the Cubans by first shooting warning shots to ask them to stop going down the river before they got to the dam.
How on earth do you suddenly stop a boat, though? That's the thing.
Well, you go to the shore, I guess.
I guess so.
But they were able to stop every night, so they could stop. But they didn't stop, according to him. So at that point, not knowing who they were, assuming they were Cubans, they just shot at them.
Presumably because they were so close to the dam at that point.
Yeah, they were very close to the dam at that point. So he says that they killed 2 and injured 1.
Okay.
That we know is mostly true because the other witnesses' accounts kind of corroborate that.
Okay.
They were assuming that could have happened. Also, we know when they started down the river and the river was quite mild, they at some point were asked to stop by the army, and instead of stopping, even though they had all the authorizations that allowed them to go all the way down the river, the whole length, and not everything was in order, they decided not to.
Oh, for God's sake.
So what they did was go as fast as they can on the rafts, hide at the bottom of the boats. Some of them jumped into the water at the end of ropes to be dragged in the water but be underwater so they wouldn't be shot.
That's crazy. That is just crazy.
And that's a fact because the members of the expedition describe that on the video. As they go down the river, they make videos every day and they relate that story. So when you hear Lieutenant Gazongo's story,
it sounds totally plausible.
Which describes exactly the same situation and exactly the same reaction from the people on the rafts, you think, he didn't invent that.
No.
That really happened.
Yeah.
They did shoot in the air like the first time. They must have told them to stop like the first time. And probably like the first time, they refused to stop.
I mean, that is just... I'm surprised they made it that far.
Yeah, well, when it happened the first time, they were lucky because the river was super wide. It was kilometers and kilometers wide. So when they were shot at...
Just drift to the other side and you're
and it was impossible
away.
to shoot. It's impossible to shoot somebody at that distance. So they were pretty safe. Unfortunately, when they got to the dam, the river is very, very narrow. It's only a 400 meters wide. So shooting somebody who's in the middle of the river, let's say right in the middle, at 200 meters away, if you're a good shooter and you have enough people shooting, you're going to shoot people.
Just seems utterly crazy that they did not have locals in the vessels with them.
Oh, they had no contact with the locals whatsoever.
And that
wasn't
just
part
insane.
of the expedition.
That is just insane.
Yeah, that's just the way they did it. Essentially, they got on the rafts at the top of the river and they were planning to go all the way down non-stop without any contact with anybody until the end.
Oh, madness.
That was the plan.
Madness.
Yeah. So when you hear his account of what happened, according to Okito, who was told by the lieutenant, you start thinking, yeah, I can see that happen because it did happen the first time. Why would it not happen the second time?
Yeah, definitely.
So Kazungo says that he arrested the survivors and they parked the rafts down the river, which is exactly what's been found.
Is that including the two dudes from the Hippo Island?
No. These arrived later.
Okay.
They have an account of what happened to them, and it's kind of interesting, but not really related. But when they were arrested by the gendarmerie when they got to the dam, they were arrested and interrogated because there were foreigners there. Yeah. And eventually they could prove who they were. Right. And before they were let go, they were forced to sign papers saying that they didn't see anything, didn't hear any gunshots, didn't see anybody being shot.
Okay.
So they had to sign papers saying that. And you think,
what did they see?
what could they have seen that the local gendarmerie was so worried they might tell people?
Yeah, I suspect that secret would probably go to the grave.
Yes, but when you have that and you have the account of Kazungo, and you know what happened before, all that is a very, very believable story.
Oh, yeah.
It all matches and everything falls into place. There's just no contradictions to what the story Okito says.
It is totally plausible.
It is totally plausible. So he says that Kazungo arrested the survivors. They parked the raft where they were later found, and they took them to the nearest city in Inga. And then there, they discovered that they had all the authorizations and who they were.
And then they let them go, and everyone lived happily ever after.
Yeah, exactly. So then they discovered that they had no reason to have shot them. And that's why when Okito was going to the area, they were told on the way that the expedition had been arrested and 2 people were shot. Because at that point, they had been arrested and they had shown their authorizations. Yeah. And now they knew who they were.
Now they went, crap.
Oh, crap. Yeah. Okito also says that as a Secret Service member, he received 4 days earlier, so we're talking 31st of July, information saying that there might be an expedition going on, and one of the members is a Belgian who has been seen talking to Libyan sympathizer in Belgium, and also there's a French guy who has been seen talking to a known DGAC operative in France. Okay, so at that point, he doesn't connect the dots.
Yeah.
But once he sees what's been going on, he remembers getting that information. So then you can think that the presidential secret services also knew that.
Yeah.
And then they had a problem on their hands because they had shot people they shouldn't have shot that were allowed to be there. And possibly 2 of them were spies.
Yeah. And
they weren't dead. So they had to decide what to do next. So what they did next is take the mercenaries between double quotes, because the secret services constantly call them mercenaries, because then it gives them an excuse. They take them to Matadi, which is a very small town in the area, to be interrogated by the presidential secret forces. They are interrogated, he says in his book, roughly, which you can understand as beaten up.
Yeah, I mean,
for about 6 hours.
Yeah, you can tell this is not some kind of soft, kind of like.
Oh no!
Interrogate. Would you like some water?
Yeah, Central Africa in the 80s. It's going to be nasty.
That's going to be brutal.
Yeah, and so they question the whole team that survived for 6 hours, and then because they're aware of these 2 dodgy people, the Belgian and Philippe,
the French,
they get 7 more hours of interrogation to talk, and Okito says they never said anything. The only thing that Philippe said was that his friend who had been wounded, he was called Lucien Blockmans, needed attention because he was bleeding. Yeah, they shot 2 and they were
injured.
dead, but 1 was wounded as well. So all he said is that he wanted his friend to be
looked after,
to be helped. Yeah. Unfortunately, it wasn't, and he died.
Oh dear.
He bled out, essentially, after being beaten up.
Yeah.
So at that point, because people are starting to try to find out what was happening or what had happened to the expedition, there's rumors starting to go around. And these rumors are in part based on what the American and the engineer were saying, that they saw people and they saw the raft and all that. So the Secret Services now have a problem because they don't want these rumors to start spreading and become a massive issue.
Yeah.
So knowing the 2 people they have, knowing that they never confessed to anything, they decide that the best way forward is to kill everybody. So they shoot everybody.
That's insane.
And that would have happened on the 9th of August, so 3 days later.
Yeah.
And Okito says they were buried in an unmarked pit near a small village cemetery. In his book, he later says that the 2 graves were marked, and one was a totally made-up name that sounds local, so that nobody would ask questions.
Yeah.
And the other one, if you translated it into English, would be "Look the Other Way."
Oh, right, okay.
So these are the 2 graves, apparently.
Yeah. Leave these 2 alone unless you want to have any more trouble.
Yes. So as a consequence of all the rumors, there's an inquiry open in Paris by the Paris police for some reason. They interviewed 25 French military personnel that were in Zaire at the time.
Right.
And their conclusion is that the assassination explanation doesn't hold water either. It's not what happened. They say they exhumed bodies, 1 body, and they didn't find any bullet holes in it, so that's not what happened. So we don't know what body they exhumed. We don't know how they knew where a body was. But anyway, the explanation is, we had a look at the body. There was no holes in it, so clearly it wasn't shot. So that story is completely false.
Right.
Interestingly, Okito says in his book that Atanga was silent by being reminded that he's a Zaire citizen, and the well-being of the country has a higher priority than his life.
Right, okay.
And he was offered a job for life in exchange for his silence.
Right.
And he took it and didn't ask questions and went away.
Okay.
So that's why when he was questioned again a week later, he wasn't too sure what he saw, because it was in his interest not to remember too clearly what he saw. Also, the American that disappeared, Ken Selman, was silenced according to him because he had been arrested in Zaire for pedophilia, and he was told that his file might somehow end up in the US.
Oh, right, okay.
And
so he's blackmailed
into disappearing, and that's why he totally disappeared.
Okay.
He didn't want to risk being a pedophile in the US. And again, that matches the evidence. So his book, pretty much the whole time, the whole story, matches the evidence we know from interviews of the crew before they got to the dam, with evidence on the ground, with witnesses, and with what happened to witnesses when they suddenly went too sure, all at the same time, and all disappeared.
Yeah.
So his book is a very, very interesting story.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, because he's dead, we can't ask him to prove any of it. The story essentially dies for many, many years. So we're talking from 1994 when the book was published to 2008. Nothing happens. There's no progress, no information, nothing. In 2008, there's a newspaper called 21, XXI, 21, who runs a story that they call the Zaire's Crocodiles.
Right.
The Crocodile du Zaire. It's a Belgian newspaper. It's an inquiry about what happened to the expedition. There's a lead journalist called Anna Michael, and she goes to Zaire and she interviews lots of people. She spends a lot of time in Zaire.
Okay. Brave.
And she brings back several documents, and these documents would prove that he was indeed executed by the Secret Services. She says that on the 8th of August, 1985, 2 days after the expedition disappeared, he was questioned by the Presidential Guard in Kinshasa, and they wrote an interview report, which starts as, on the 8th day of August, 1985, was interrogated Philippe de Dieuleveult. That document, as far as she can tell, looks totally authentic. It has all the right stamps, it has all the right signatures, it has all the right headings, the right paper. Everything is right for being what it's supposed to be.
So hard proof.
As far as she's concerned, it's hard proof. There's even the name of the person in charge, the chief of operations in the area at the time, and she reported that Major K. She probably doesn't want to give his name.
No.
And it mentions Philippe as being the defendant, and it even has Philippe's signature at the end of the interrogation report on what he said and what he was asked and all that.
Okay.
And that signature was authenticated by his brother Jean. So as far as anybody's concerned at the newspaper, that's proof that he survived, he was arrested, and he was executed.
So that guy's book was right then?
That would prove that the book is right as well. She collects testimonies from ex-Zaire army people that were in the area at the time, and she notes who they are, how to contact them and everything. They remember having received orders to stop some white people going down the river that were, as they were told, mercenaries.
Okay. And
several were shot on the spot and some arrested. Again, that goes totally with what the book says.
What the story was. It seems that she's doing a lot more investigating than the French government did.
Totally, yes. Yeah. After the publication of the 21 article, new witnesses come forward, and some of them are friends of people on the expedition. So, for example, one of Philippe's friends says that he was normally a fairly laid-back person.
Yeah.
And just before he left for the expedition, his behavior completely changed. He suddenly seemed nervous and worried when he normally wasn't. And he also changed his appearance to look more military-like. So he normally had like messy hair, fairly long hair, and suddenly he has a buzz cut. He had never had a buzz cut in his life. So that friend found it very strange at the time, and he asked him, "Are you really sure you want to go to Africa in close to war areas looking like a military person?" And apparently Philippe dismissed it and didn't really talk about it again.
Yeah.
But that is a weird decision.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. Another friend, who's a friend of Lucien Blockman, so the guy who was wounded.
Okay.
And eventually died.
Yeah.
Also says that they had a party with him one day, not long before he left, and he was quite drunk. And he told them that that whole expedition was a spy affair. And it's like, okay. So maybe the Zairians were right. Maybe they had spies on the team.
Yeah.
And these people say that they had always been suspicious of Lucien not because he was a bad person, but because his backstory never made sense to them. So he was officially working for French TV as a technician, but at the same time, he never seemed to really work. He was never at work.
Okay.
And he, for example, followed the Paris-Dakar on location, which is nearly impossible unless you're a professional.
Yeah.
And he was bringing back cars from the Paris-Dakar.
That's crazy.
Which is crazy. If you're a technician working for TV, why would we bring back the cars?
Yeah, that's really weird.
So they always thought his story is kind of weird.
Yeah.
But anyway, so according to them, he said it was a spy thing.
So, I mean, there definitely seem to be people of questionable, rather secretive background.
Yeah, a few of them were,
Yeah.
The others are very unknown, so it's hard to tell. But yeah, some of them were.
So, I mean, they weren't mercenaries, but they certainly weren't just going down the river just for the fun of it.
It's hard to tell because being on the river, I'm not too sure what kind of spying they could do. Unless maybe spying on the installations along the river or something, but that would have been easy to do by a plane.
Yeah, I don't know.
And they wouldn't have been able to stop you. So I don't know. I don't know what the real motivation. It could be that yes, they were dodgy people, and they were spies, but not necessarily then. They were just doing a random expedition, and they just happened to be spies.
Yeah, they were just spies on their holidays.
But it's kind of weird that he said that the whole expedition was a spy affair as well.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Was he lying? Was he? I don't know.
There's something rum.
There's
something just as rum as probably drinking the water.
Yeah.
In the river.
Yeah. And also after the article, some more documents came out, and some of them were more reports of interrogation. As a result of that, Jean, Philippe's brother, presses charges against the French government and the French secret services for complicity of assassination.
Yeah.
There's an inquiry that's opened again by the Paris police, And they send some of the documents that the journalists sent them to a lab for analysis to see if they were real or not.
Okay.
The lab says that most likely the arrest and interrogation report was a fake, that his signature had been drawn in ink over a scan of the signature.
Okay.
They don't think it is true.
Okay.
The police contacts the journalist to ask her for her contacts and for any document she has. So she provides all the documents she has. She provides all the names and addresses and everything that she had from Zaire. They try to contact at least one of them, but they don't seem to be able to create a rapport with them, and nothing comes out of the call. So I suspect they went gung-ho and said, "We're the police, you're going to tell us what happened." And the guy said, "Fuck you."
Yeah.
And that was it. So they probably didn't try very hard, but they never got anywhere.
So, but I mean, so they were just, okay, that's one document's not kosher. None of them are kosher. And
Essentially, yes.
We might give a half-hearted attempt at picking up the phone once or twice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also, for some of the other documents, they didn't conclude that they were true, but they said we can't find anything wrong with them.
Okay.
Which is essentially the same.
Yeah.
They're saying that, the others are right and the others are real documents and they are what they say they are. But somehow that didn't help.
No.
Also, according to an update to the article published by 21 again in 2010, so 2 years later, they contacted the people in the sources in Zaire again, and they were told, no, nobody called us. We had never had any contact with anybody. So it sounds like the police in Paris didn't try. It was another to contact anybody.
Job. Yeah.
Yeah. They thought that nobody would know, so
yeah.
They didn't try to contact them. Even though some of the friends of people taking part in the expedition said, "Yeah, come to us and talk to us. We know more than we've said."
Yeah.
They were never contacted either. So it's not just a question of being in Zaire. Even the people in France and Belgium were not contacted. And somehow none of the documents that seemed to be valid were ever used for anything.
That's just hugely frustrating.
Yes, and since 2010, there's no news of anything happening further than that.
Clearly, the governments just want this story just to die and just to be left in the past, just because of political sensitivity.
Yeah, also, it's kind of funny that it's the Paris police that opened the inquiry, because when they were asked, why didn't you go to Zaire to interview people, they were said, well, we didn't have the authorization to go to Zaire. So, why didn't you try to get the authorization?
Yeah.
Or if you couldn't go, well, would someone else not take on the inquiry that could go to Zaire?
Yeah.
So, anyway, in conclusion, many years later, in the late 80s, early 90s, a body was repatriated by the French embassy in Zaire to France.
Oh, right, okay.
And the French embassy said, that's Philippe's body, you need to bury it. That's fine.
All right, okay.
The family got an autopsy done, and it turns out that body had no head, no arms, no legs. So it was a trunk.
It was just a torso.
It was just a torso, and it wasn't Philippe's.
Ugh.
So that raises two questions. One is, why would they send that body? And why would the embassy pretend it's Philippe if it's not? What did they base it on? And also, who's that dude?
Yeah.
Who's that dude they sent in a coffin to France that is not the person they say it was? So who's that person who died that nobody knows?
Yeah.
And 35 years later, after the disappearance, it looks like we'll never know anything, because really nothing is happening. There's a few competing stories, a very interesting book, but that's about it. What's surprising is that Okito's book not only gives a good story, but is very specific.
Yeah.
You would think that a guy who's going to mix things up would be vague.
Yeah.
But his book is extremely specific. He gives names of places, of people, of everything. He describes where the graves were and everything. It would have been very easy in 94 to go and check.
Yeah, to verify the
Nobody
stuff.
went. Ugh. There's been no check whatsoever. The first person who tried to follow on those information was his son in 2006.
Oh, that's so long after.
Exactly. We're talking more than 20 years later.
Yeah.
And he interviewed, for example, the undertaker at the cemetery where the bodies were supposed to have been buried in the pit.
Mm-hmm.
And that guy said, oh, no, there's no way they could have buried anybody when I was there. I would have known. So, no, it didn't happen. what do we think the probability is that if they wanted to bury somebody in that small cemetery, they could give him a small coin and go away for the evening?
Yeah, turn away.
And then nobody would know.
Yeah.
Because the cemetery is totally overgrown. It's jungle. So it's just there's trees in the middle of the cemetery. It's just they had to go around the cemetery with a machete and stuff. So it would be impossible to find anything in there. Especially since also all the graves are marked with wooden crosses and stuff. And 20 years later, they'd be gone.
Rotting, yes.
Even if they weren't rotted, they would have been taken by the wind, by animals, by anything.
Yeah.
Everything would be gone. So nobody tried to find out exactly if anything in the book was true, which is really disappointing because the details would have made it easy to discredit the book totally.
Or find this poor guy's body.
Exactly. But no, nothing happened. So most likely, we'll never know what happened.
And it was a possible national incident. Well, there's a reason why the Dark Continent is called the Dark Continent. And deepest, darkest Africa. It's probably safer to stay in France.